kid, you're right. You're absolutely right about Obama being the only one of the three of them that gets any clue. And that's really a sad statement, considering at one time McCain seemed to be sincere maverick, although from what I hear that was possibly a put on. And Hillary, a very bright woman who keeps listening to her spin doctors and criticizing Obama, not because she wants to guide him to be better, but she wants to tear him down. If Hillary would just tell Barack things that would make him better, she wouldn't constantly be screwing up, because it's over. So she should go down for posterity, because she's got a big career in front of her. It's very sad. But it isn't very sad to listen to this guy. Now, if I could just make a small boast, I think that a lot of the intellectual heavyweights of the world come out of the Bay Area, because I think this kid sure is bright, and it reminds me of a lot of people I grew up with in Davis in the 70s. Not that many, actually. There were a few very sharp kids, and it's funny to see this person, OK Junebug, is in Davis, and so I'm a Davis and San Francisco person myself, but to speak specifically to the issues, when you call this speech the bitter speech of Gettysburg Address, it was riveting. I really wanted to show it to my wife. But what would you call Cooper Union, where he actually went back to the history of the concept of whether you're going to have a federal bank or not in the United States, going back to Jefferson and Adams and bringing it all the way out to the modern 20th century. Talk about difference from all of these other guys. Or the race speech on Philadelphia, or the stump speech itself. But getting to this issue of the bitterness of the American middle class, this all started, the modern phase of this, back with globalization. So every enlightened person was for tearing down the boundaries, globalization, rising middle classes in countries that have exploding populations. What happens when people get middle class? They stop having 8 kids and they start having 2 kids. Because it's not about one of the kids surviving to take care of them when they're old. It's about having a good quality of life, being able to concentrate on a couple of kids and get them through university. Having 8 kids doesn't happen so much, and for many reasons, and so as a result, our global population would slow. So we all wanted a middle class in these countries. It also reduces extremism, fanaticism, ignorance, a lot of other bad things. So we want the poor countries to have strong middle classes. And more trade means less war. And back when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, wars were going to be fought with nuclear weapons. Iraq was a client state of Russia. If the U.S. had invaded Iraq in the early 80s or 70s, we would have had a global thermonuclear war potentially. So we couldn't have these little adventures when there were 2 or 3 armed nuclear superpowers who were proxying for every single country. It almost seems like the good old days when you look at what could happen now. 4, so those were good things. But in our rush for this globalization, we forgot Reagan's use of the Russian saying, trust but verify. And we can't really help the world by buying its goods if we don't export any goods and we don't produce any goods, can we? So Obama does get it. So how do we solve this globalization problem, which leads to the next big problem, which is outsourcing and offshoring? And the basic one saving area is green economics. In green economics, there's a concept in economics called internalizing the externalities. And what that means is that if you have a polluting industry, you don't get to just cream off the profits of your polluting industry and then let the community pay for the pollutions. The same principle could apply to morally derelict operation, heroin distribution, prostitution, gambling. Why should a casino be able to open and not pay the social costs? So, of course, the problem is, how do you calculate those costs fairly? For a lot of people, this sounds very radical, but this is the new cutting edge field of economics, is internalizing these externalities. And it calls upon a part of economics called, I believe, normative economics, where we're looking for uh, desirable social outcomes of economic activity, rather than just dragging blocks and dropping them in the sea, which you could build a whole economy on, according to Keynes. And a lot of conservatives after him understood this, that you can keep people busy to power economies. Hitler certainly understood that. Not that I want to endorse Hitler at all, but he understood getting everyone to work, regardless of what they're doing, could power an economy, because he had a smoke and mirrors economy under the Reich. So what we wound up doing, and Obama gets this too, is the carbon trading, so that basically you can have a forest in Mexico that is selling its ability to cleanse carbon to polluters. And it sounds bad at first, and it also sounds like feel-good economics, but it's actually extremely powerful for saving us from the downside of globalization. So what do we do with the money from these taxes on polluting industries, for example, or tariffs on polluting industries? Well, that's obviously you can do with that is you can have a reverse sales tax, for example, on things that produce social benefits, whether it's literature or solar energy or education. You could literally, instead of funding new government programs, you could just have a negative sales tax on things that were positive. Now the problem is one man's meat is another man's poison. So how do you do all of this economic analysis in Washington? Imagine the combination. And that's going to be requiring that we stop playing games there in this venal, corrupt atmosphere and start actually working there for the people. I think if you could change the dynamic where people are actually trying to work instead of trying to dominate each other in ego trips and get more power than the next person, but that's human nature. You know, my Republican friends always remind me about that old human nature, but if we could change that dynamic, it sure would make the economics of pricing out things like pollution into tariffs a lot less of a spectacle than it could be when everything's highly politicized and corrupt. So it's not going to be easy. But Obama again showed the right thinking at the Cooper Union speech when he talked about how we have an outdated regulatory structure in our economy. And this has led to the Bear Stearns bailout. And the problem is that with these subprime mortgages, most of the lenders nowadays aren't regulated anymore because they're not banks. They're investment banks. And he said the principle should be if you borrow from the discount window of the Fed, you should be regulated by the Fed in terms of your liquidity and so forth. So, you know, it's not a big deal. But what it shows is when he had to come out and take a stand, he applied a logical principle. So he's showing the kind of thinking we need to find the principles that we can apply so we know that we can level the playing field between us and a country like China, which has a poor human rights, very poor collective bargaining, and poor environmental record. Of course, their products are going to be cheaper than ours, but by tariffing those negatives, we can actually support industries in China. And Richard Holbrooke just mentioned this yesterday or so on the Bill Mayer news show, that we could, you know, support factories in China that don't pollute. So we can, you know, inject some positivity into globalization again if we get on the bandwagon here. Or the same for products that are produced with proper organized labor. All this concept of organized labor in a country that's down to 20% or less union, what does it exactly mean? Decent paying jobs where workers have input into their management, small businesses, who qualifies to be decent condition labor? Because we want our products produced by people of decent conditions and a voice and the ability to move from that job to another.